Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. My name is OctoMan, and today we are talking about collision detection. I haven't set up much over here, so basically it's the same thing as I did already before with my take damage and do damage function, or actually my take damage, do damage video. So we're gonna take a look into it a bit further today, or basically we are going to check in what is possible and how do we actually detect different possibilities for collisions. So first off, I want to create a plane in my game over here. I'm gonna go there. I use the Unity render pipeline, the universal render pipeline. That's why all of that is now looking a bit weird. So I go and try to auto generate lighting, which it doesn't let me. Why ever? That is so dark. I have no idea. So probably I just need to do it like that to auto generate a lighting over there. I don't know. Anyway, how do we actually go and take a look into the actual, let me reset this one over here. How do we do a look into this a collision? So first off, what do we need for collision is we need to have something who can measure collision, and it doesn't matter if it is 2D or 3D. In that case, we can use multiple different colliders. So a collider is able to detect specific collision overall. So again, I don't know why this is so dark over here, and I don't know if that has to do something with intensity, or maybe the main material is super dark. So usually my scene is not. What I want to do is now I want to create a simple thing in which we are going to, or I'm going to, let's say, create some objects on runtime. And another object I want to have which is going to detect the actual collision with that one object. For that thing, I created a little 3D model, which is a car, a super simple one, nothing fancy overall. It's a bit huge, but it doesn't really matter at all. So what I want to do now is, at first I want to spawn a bunch of cars out of a box as an example, and I want to have some other cars which are going to be able to be detected if a collision happens, for example. So I don't do anything to my car, at least for the moment, not for this one car, because probably that is going to be the player car. And depending on whatever the current the state or whatever the game is going to be about, we want to make sure that let's assume we want to hop over cars whenever we tap a button or whatever. So all of that is possible with that kind of a situation. So what you can do is, or what I'm going to do now here is, by the way, if you want to follow this tutorial over here, you can also use a cube or a sphere or whatever you want to. I'm going to create a second car, Control D for duplicate. You can snap rotate by hitting or keeping going the control key over there. So I want to detect if one car is hitting another car. So this is what I want to first off make sure and see if that is going to happen. So, and since that are unspecific shapes, we need to decide what kind of collision objects we are going to need and who is going to check for this particular collision. Because everything is object-based, meaning this object is detecting that object, or vice versa. We can say, okay, we only want the player to detect collision. That is also happening. And also we do have multiple ways to do that. And we have multiple kind of collision. The first one is a rigid body collision, which means, a rigid body is always necessary on one of these objects, but there are collider collisions and trigger collisions. So one is triggering something, one is colliding with something. So we need to know how we want to actually collide with one object and another. Since I have unspecific shapes of these cars, we can, for example, go and add a box collider to it. What's happening with the box collider, it takes the average or the maximum size of the car, but in my case only the tip or the top of the car, but not the wheels at this place, because the wheels are, you know, just circles over there. But that is fine. So this is the first thing you need. You need to have a collider on your car. Let's take a look into the other car, because that one needs a collider as well. The cool thing is we can also mix colliders. So it doesn't matter if it is a box collider, it doesn't matter if it is a mesh collider. Depending on how high the detection needs to be, like how precise the detection needs to be, we can also use another one which is called a mesh collider. So it takes the actual 3D mesh of the object. I'm gonna disable the mesh renderer for a second. As you can see, the mesh actual mesh collider can take more precise collisions to the polygons provided on the car itself. Most of the time that is not necessary, but probably you want to measure more left, more right, more on the side if you have some specific crashes on specific things. But even a box collider should be able to do this. Okay, I get rid of the mesh collider again, remove the component, and I enable the mesh renderer again and add back my box collider. There are multiple collision objects or collision colliders. In that case, we also do have capsule colliders and a bunch of others. For 2D, you're going to have also some which are called edge collider or rectangle collider, circle collider, and so on. There are a bunch of things. You can always go into add component and just go into the physics 2D or the physics tab. The normal one, as you can see, has a cloth collider and all the other good stuff. So multiple joints, rigid body, sphere collider, and so on and so forth. Just take a look into them and see what fits your project the best. What I want to do with the car now, for this car or even this car, basically it doesn't matter. I want to let them drive to each other. So I want to move this one into its forward axis onto this other one. If I go to local, I'm going to see the forward axis on my car is pointing into the forward axis of this car and this one over here. To see where the forward axis is, you can always switch between global and local over here. Good. Now I want to take this car and let this one drive into this direction, like in its forward direction. How do I do this? Is I can't do an animation, of course, but I maybe gonna go and do more with a code over here. So in my case, I'm gonna go and create a new C# script in my scripts folder. So I go create C# script, and let's say this is my car. It's not an AI, but it's my AI car. With that kind of movement, you can move literally anything on its forward axis times a speed or something, whatever you please and like. For our case, it's again just the only important thing is the collision we are currently looking into. So, as an example, if you create something like an avoidance game where you want to avoid objects which are coming into your direction, as an example, because you are, I don't know, a ghost driver over there. Once my mono develop has been loaded, it's going to take a second or 5. We're going to be able to pass in all the necessary things into the code over there. Now I need to open this one, name it, or I named it AI car, so I double click to open. So in my case over here, I maybe don't need start, but what I do need is update. The update loop drives my car in a forward direction as an example. We can also use a coroutine to move things forward. Basically, it doesn't really matter. The easiest one for that particular case is going to be using transform.translate. We can translate an object from one point to another over a vector-3 translation. What we can give in here is multiple scenarios. As an example, just a simple vector-3 translation. In my case, I use vector3.forward times a speed variable. I don't have it. We're going to implement it in a second. Times time.delta time. And close the line with a semicolon. So what we can now see is we need a speed variable. I'm going to create a float for that so I can have uneven numbers, and I can also set this one to, let's say, a speed of 10. Don't forget to hit Ctrl S to save the script, and now you should be able to go back to Unity. The compiler is going to compile the script now and is going to take a look into, okay, where do we want to put this thing into? Make sure you always have the console open so you can see stuff better over here. Once everything has been loaded, you want to make sure that the AI car scripts sits on our AI car over here. When I now press play, the car should move forward. If that doesn't work, then I have done something wrong. Pretty good. So now the car is constantly moving in the forward direction by a speed of 10. The speed of 10 again is calculated by the current runtime and multiplied by that. The forward axis is going to give us just the Z transform, like where the car is currently looking into. Pretty good. So now we want to check who is colliding who. We're gonna do the collision, let's say, on our player car. I'm gonna rename this one to be the player car, because probably I want to change my mind and make a game out of it. Like, as I said before, like an endless runner or whatever, or just an avoidance game. And every time you avoid something, like avoid any car, we can detect that collision thing. For that, we're gonna go and create a bit more content. So what I want to do is I want to affect my car over here. So first off, I create a new C# script again, and just, let's say, a car controller. This is not really a controller, because for the moment we only want to detect specific things, like specific collisions. So I want to make sure that the car controller sits on my player car, so the one which I currently have over here. Now I want to open the script again and want to develop Visual Studio or whatever you please and like or currently work with. So in my car controller, I don't want to do anything in update, except I want to do some movement as an example, moving left, moving right. I also don't need start at this particular point, since I don't really have any game scenario over there. What I want to do is, let me get rid, at least for the moment, of the update loop, so we start rather clean. What I want to implement now is a function which is called, and this needs to be precise, on trigger enter. And on trigger enter triggers a collision. It can measure a trigger component with another trigger component. Also, there are mixed possibilities. But it takes an argument in the parentheses, which is going to be of type collider. And we give it a name, let's say COL or collider or whatever. So once we gonna hit, or so once something hits this trigger enter zone, it's going to fire. So what we can do is to check if that trigger gets hit, we can say debug.log, and we just learn to debug if something hits you. So what I can do is I got hit, and I want to see if that is going to trigger. This debug line is going to land in the console later on, so we want to see if that is able to happen. So in that case, we wait for the car, which is hopefully going to hit us. What we also need to take care of that the mesh collider of the actual plane is deactivated, so there's no point or no possibility for the car to collide with the actual plane. So once this car is going into this car, we should see something on the console. But we don't. Why? Because none of these objects is going to contain a rigid body component. For a trigger collision, a rigid body on one or the other object is necessary. So let me put a rigid body onto our player car. We don't want to use gravity, so I deactivate gravity and press play and see what's happening. Both of these do contain no trigger collider. As you can see, still nothing works. Now I'm gonna enable trigger in the box collider component on my player and see again if something is going to enter this car's trigger. As you can now see, I got triggered. So that means at any time we want to trigger something without reacting to something, then the I got hit or the trigger enter is going to work over here. So whenever the collision is entering or hitting the car by a trigger, or if our actual box collider is a trigger component, then this is going to trigger whenever any type of collider is going to hit our object, or in this case our player car controller. We can also do another one, which is called void on collision enter. A collision is different than a trigger. A collision is using the rigid body on two objects. It also takes an argument which is of type collision in that case. Why do we take these arguments is rather simple, because we can always check what is the actual collision, who is actually colliding with us, and then we can react to specific objects or to specific whatever things and scenarios we want to check over here. I'm gonna do another command or another debug line over here, and now I'm gonna say I got hit by a collision, so we get a different debug scenario over here. Now let's press play again and see if meanwhile no other change has happened, but a line of code to check for a collision instead of a collider or trigger collision. Nothing happens, as you can see over here. Now I deactivate the is trigger, and now let's try again if those two get actually a measurement on the hit over here, which they don't. Let's assume we need to have another object rigid body over there. I don't use gravity, so both are now a non-trigger, so a collision collider, but both do have a rigid body component. So this can react to that and vice versa as well. What you can now see is that the car is now pushing away the other car. And we're gonna see I got hit by a collision. That is going to be like a physics kind of collision over there. Also, depending on the speed, as you can see, the one was so fast that it was pushing into the other car. But that is probably something we want to get here. So in that case, whenever we get hit by this car using a collision but not a trigger, we're gonna get pushed away. But this push away only works if both elements contain a rigid body component, having a mass, and using a collider which do not have the trigger option over there. Once I put this one to be a trigger, it will pass by this object. Why? Because it is not reacting or actually not pushing away things, as you can see over here, and it now gets back to the old trigger over there. So what you now can do is you can detect collision just by code with two functions, with I use a trigger enter or a collision enter. What you also can measure in collision enter where the hit point, for example, is. Let's assume you're going to shoot something onto that car, or you throw something onto that car. You can see where the damage is taken. So where is the initial point of this collider? If you want to only measure for specific things, then you can use the tag system. For example, we can tag this object being an enemy. To do so, we go to untagged, add a tag, open the list, and say this is an enemy. We can also put another one in here for, let's say, a pickup. So if we want to pick up something, we can measure for different scenarios over here. Let's assume we have this car. We tag this one as being an enemy. And let's assume we have a coin or something to collect, which we want to pick up. In that case, we want to check for multiple scenarios while we are, let's say, entering a trigger or entering a collider. Also, we can see if things are going to give us points. Let's assume we're gonna have an integer over here. Let me make this one public so we can see this in the inspector, which will give us some score. This is just for representation or for you to see what the difference can be between those two functions. So whenever we gonna hit or get hit by a collision because of the car, then we want to do something like, oh no, I got hit, or game over, lose a life, or whatever. And then we probably also want to reset the complete scene. The other thing is we can also set score by going through a trigger zone. But how can we use that trigger zone over here? Well, pretty simple. Whenever something, whatever it is, let's assume a specific thing like a tag, as I said before, like a pickup, then we can check for it. In that case, we can say, okay, if the collider we are actually hitting, and we can compare that collider's tag with one specific one, so compare tag, open close parentheses, then in quotes we can put in a name. The name is going to be the tag we have chosen before. In our case, we used pickup. So it needs to be case sensitive and correctly written. So whenever we collide with something which is called a pickup, we're gonna get score. So we can say score, let's say ++. You can also debug the score at this point. Debug.log, and then we can debug the score. So we always know that we got one. Same for collision enter. We can also say we negate score by whatever it is. Of course, we don't have much to interact with at the moment, but that's fine. Control S for a quick save over here. Let the compiler run, and let's add some more trigger zones. But what do I mean by trigger zones? This collider here needs to be a collider. This one here needs to be a collider as well. But let's assume this object over here has some extra trigger zones. Our AI do have some trigger zones. So how can we do this? We can create a new 3D object, as an example, a cube. And this cube is driving with the car because it is part of it. What we can do is we can create those trigger zones visually. I'm gonna Control D to duplicate to the other side, like so. And now let's assume every time we go through these areas, we get points. So we're gonna make them a pickup zone. We wanna make sure that those two are set to be trigger. Don't forget, the car is testing for both collisions. The collision with that car itself. So we can try that out again. We let the car just drive forwards. And we say, I got hit by collision. Our player, of course, has no score because it doesn't pass by a trigger zone. But let's assume our car is going to be here. The car itself is using its trigger zones, moving through our car, and now we got a point, a score over here in the car controller, just for bypassing the enemy car. And this is how you can literally trigger any type of collision with just a trigger or actual collision colliders over here. If you have any question now, feel free to write in the chat, or if you want me to solve anything else over there. Otherwise, we are good to go with that rather simple design for specific collision detection over here. Again, there are multiple ways to do this. There are multiple collision objects to do stuff. We can also use colliders to measure if we are currently leaving the scene or something like that. So if there's some object to the left or to the right, we can collide against it so we don't leave the game scene, as an example, and so on. There are also other ways for collision detection, by the way, which are called raycasting. With raycasting, you can shoot a ray in any direction, as an example, forward direction, or any kind of direction from any point in the game, and see if the ray is going to hit a collider. So basically, it's doing the same, but we just need to send that one raycast into, let's say, a forward direction to get a feel or have a feeler in front to see if something has happened or not. Also, what we can do is we can put a feeler up in front and, let's say, automate our player to steer in one or the other direction. So, for example, and this is going to be automated in that case. So, for example, it feels, oh, there is an enemy on one of my feeler. Whenever it comes to me, then we give it a feeler like in the front, like, for example, with a raycast or with another collision object. And then we can say, okay, if that one feeler feels something, move the car to the left, to the right, so it can automatically avoid, like an AI could. In that case, we could, let's say, create 3 spawn points over here, and let's create a bunch of cars in a good amount of time, like in between, so we have enough space to navigate through that car. And we can say, okay, this car is doing AI movement, for example, to see, okay, where am I? Am I able to actually move left, right, or whatever in, to avoid the enemy cars. But again, that is basically everything I wanted to cover in this rather short way or short tutorial. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask down below in the comment section or use the chat meanwhile it's on. Otherwise, I go and stop for it. Or if you have any collision specific question, feel free to ask at any time, again, inside the inside the comment section down below. So, for collectibles, by the way, you can always go and say, okay, there's a coin on the road and you want to collect this one. You can easily do the same thing. Once you hit the actual trigger of that coin, you can also say you want to destroy the collided objects. So, let me try to demonstrate that. We can say whenever we get the score, we can say call.gameObject, and this is the object we want to destroy, and then we can say destroy this one object we are currently colliding with the trigger zone. That doesn't really make sense for our car collider over here, but probably it does to avoid cheating or something like that, if there is a way to cheat. And if I now go and collide with that one tile over there, because my car is over here, you can see that this object, like this specific game object, got collided and collected. So I can collect like coins or any other pickups, live ups, and all the other stuff, but just by moving them forward or move the car forward. It basically doesn't matter what you move. Probably the easiest way for an endless runner is let the objects move into your direction, and once this car enters another zone, you can destroy it, as an example. So for that, you would just create another 3D object, cube for example, anywhere in the scene for the moment. You can place that wherever you want to. You can also tint it with any color you like. I'm gonna use that one tool here to collision detect. And now the last thing for this car is, okay, if I enter or trigger this trigger zone, like I make this one a trigger zone, you can also rename it to be a trigger zone. You can say you want to destroy the car with all its rest, so you don't have too much objects inside the scene. Or you're gonna go over object pooling and pull the car into your object pool or your car pool, and then you go and use it whenever necessary again. So, and to enter this, you just check for another tag. You can say I want to add a new tag. You can name this one dead zone, like so. We want to make sure that this trigger zone is actually the dead zone. And in the car, in the AI car, you can also check for a collision. So we can say void on trigger enter. Again, we take the argument of a collider, COL. And in that case, we want to see if we hit a dead zone. So if COL dot compare tag is going to be the dead zone, we can destroy this game object. And then we are good to go and the car is gone as well. So let's test this out as being the very last thing over here. Since no questions arrive here, I just let the car go. We collect the pickup, we get the score, and the AI car is gone forever because it was hitting the actual dead zone of the playfield. So that's basically everything I wanted to cover in this tutorial. I hope you everything is working fine for you. I hope you even more understand collisions and triggers and colliders and all the other stuff. And once again, if you need any help, then visit my website www.octomangames.com and hire me for your project if you need help for anything specific. So I would be happy to help you out in the future as well. So thanks a lot for tuning in, and yeah, talk to you soon or see you in one of my upcoming tutorials over here. Bye bye.